Hey guys, tonight we're going on a culinary journey that's less Michelin star and more mystery meat surprise. Welcome to the world of Victorian junk food, a world where breakfast could be chalk, lunch might be laced with arsenic, and dessert is basically a lawsuit waiting to happen. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that gentle background hum, and nestle into your blanket. If you have snacks, maybe hide them. Trust me, you'll want to after this. Let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered why the Victorians thought blue raspberry was a perfectly natural color for candy? Or what exactly went into a penny bun? And do you really want to know? Would you survive a Victorian dinner party, or would you tap out at the sight of gelatinous eels and neon green pickles? Was Victorian ketchup closer to actual ketchup, or just slightly spicy paint? And most importantly, could you make it through an entire day eating nothing but what a working-class Victorian kid could afford with a single grimy coin? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in the heart of industrial London, sometime around 1850. The air is thick with coal smoke, your shoes are optional, and your stomach is already rumbling. Welcome to the wild world of Victorian junk food. Good luck. You roll out of your lumpy straw mattress and instantly regret it. Your back hurts, the floor is freezing, and the only thing that stands between you and actual starvation is a breakfast stall selling something called faggots and peas. The smell is equal parts inviting and ominous. Is it meat? Is it sawdust? It's best not to ask. You hand over your precious penny, take a bite, and try not to think about the strange crunch. Welcome to breakfast in Victorian London, where hope springs eternal, but breakfast often doesn't. The good news: you're eating hot food. The bad news: no one can agree on what it actually is. Victorian street vendors are masters of the edible illusion, and their secret ingredient is usually creativity. The faggots are technically meatballs, but in this time and place, meatball is a concept, not a guarantee. It could be beef, it could be pork, it could be something with enough legs that you don't want to picture it before your second bite. If it's crunchy, that's either a bonus or a warning. You stand in the chilly London dawn, steam from the food mingling with the persistent coal smog haze. Around you, hungry kids jostle for position, clutching coins so tightly their palms are permanently marked. The vendor is a force of nature, bellowing faggots and peas, fresh from the oven, though the only thing fresh is the layer of soot settling onto everything. His hands are a medical mystery, part human, part grease. He grins, showing off teeth that look like they're auditioning for early retirement, and you have a moment of clarity. This is breakfast as a survival sport. Let's talk about the faggots themselves. They're theoretically made from offal, breadcrumbs, and herbs, all squished together and boiled or baked to form a dense, meaty orb. Offal is a polite word for every leftover bit that didn't get sold to anyone with money or options. If you're lucky, the flavor is peppery. If you're less lucky, it's mystery mince with a side of cartilage. Still, the peas are green, even if it's the kind of green that vegetables turn after being boiled since Tuesday. They offer a certain comfort, like a warm, mushy hug for your teeth. You shovel the food into your mouth, ignoring the occasional pebble or fragment of bone, and remind yourself that this is the best meal you'll get all day. Victorian London runs on breakfast stalls. Forget your avocado toast or perfectly poached eggs. Here, it's a choice between starvation and culinary Russian roulette. The city's poor, especially children, depend on these vendors for their first calories of the day. Protein? Maybe. Carbohydrates? If breadcrumbs count? Vitamins? Technically, there's parsley. But mostly, you're eating to fill a void, not to achieve optimum nutrition. In fact, most mornings are a negotiation with your own stomach. Do you want to eat this? Or do you want to eat nothing? You look around. Other options beckon. A slice of yesterday's bread slathered with lard, if you can afford it. Or a dubious wedge of dripping cake, which is exactly as appetizing as it sounds. Some kids buy penny pies, tiny, palm-sized pastries, with fillings that range from mystery meat to mystery question mark. If you're flush with cash, you might splurge on a hot cup of tea. Of course, it's mostly tannin, barely colored, and served in a cup that's seen more lips than a family reunion. But it's hot, and it almost tastes like optimism. As you eat, you listen to the city waking up. Chimney sweeps cough their way down the lane. Costermongers shout about apples with more bruises than actual fruit. And a faint chorus of church bells rings out in the smoggy distance. You chew thoughtfully, or at least as thoughtfully as one can chew, when every bite is a leap of faith. The world is grim, the streets are muddy, but at least your stomach isn't empty, for now. By the time you finish, your penny is gone, your hunger is momentarily sated, and your sense of wonder at Victorian food safety is fully engaged. Will you survive till lunch? Maybe. Will you ever know what you just ate? Absolutely not. But that's breakfast in Victorian London, a hot meal, a cold morning, and the lingering mystery of what exactly just crunched between your teeth. Bread is the Victorian equivalent of Wi-Fi. Without it, nothing works. Unfortunately, your daily loaf is more chemistry experiment than carbohydrate. It's padded out with chalk, alum, and occasionally the mysterious bone dust. If your teeth survive, your intestines might not. Let's set the scene. It's early morning, and you're standing in a bakery queue that stretches halfway down the sooty street. You watch as the baker's apprentice tosses loaves into baskets, each one landing with a thud that could wake the dead. The air smells faintly of yeast, ash, and the underlying suspicion that someone is getting away with something, because in Victorian London they probably are. Bread is your lifeline. For poor families, it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you're lucky, you'll get a heel of something brown and still warm from the oven. If you're less lucky, it's yesterday's brick masquerading as breakfast. Either way, you eat it because, frankly, the alternative is hunger. But here's the twist. That innocent-looking loaf isn't just flour, water, and yeast. It's a vehicle for some of the most creative food fraud in history. Let's talk ingredients. In a world before food safety laws, profit is king. White bread, once the privilege of the upper crust, pun intended, becomes a working-class staple, sort of, to keep up with demand and shave pennies off the cost, bakers turn to improvers. That means flour gets cut with chalk, ground-up limestone, even powdered plaster. Why? Because it whitens the bread and adds weight. So the loaf feels hearty in your hand, if not in your soul. Some bakers get inventive, tossing in alum, an astringent chemical, to make the bread whiter and fluffier. And sometimes, just for good measure, a sprinkle of bone dust for that authentic texture. You buy a loaf, admiring the way it holds its shape, even when you could probably use it as a building material. The crust is pale, the inside suspiciously spongy, and each bite is an adventure. If you taste a hint of bitterness, that's probably the alum. If you feel grit, congratulations, you've found the bone dust. It's like eating drywall, but with a hint of nostalgia. And chalk? Well, at least you'll never get rickets. The consequences are immediate and, frankly, miserable. Victorian children develop stomachaches that defy medical explanation. Adults lose teeth, or discover that bread is a wonderful delivery system for indigestion and long-term regret. You'd think people would catch on, but hunger and habit are powerful motivators. Besides, the difference between authentic and adulterated bread is subtle. unless you're unlucky enough to bite into a particularly chunky slice and lose a filling. But there's another side to the bread crisis: status. In Victorian society, white bread is a sign you've made it. Brown bread, dense and rough, is for the destitute. So bakers cater to snobbery. The whiter the loaf, the higher the demand, and the more chalk it takes to keep up appearances. Housewives compare loaves like trophies. Children eye the softest, palest slices with envy. Nobody wants to admit that their bread is just plaster in a clever disguise. And it isn't just the bread itself. Victorian London's bread police do exist, but they're as effective as a biscuit in a thunderstorm. Occasionally, a chemist blows the whistle. Publishing exposes on the horrors lurking in your daily loaf. The public responds with a brief outcry, then quietly goes back to eating whatever's on offer. Food regulation is still decades away, and in the meantime, the only real safeguard is a strong jaw and low expectations. Still, you eat. You dip your bread in weak tea, dunk it in watery soup, use it to mop up whatever questionable stew you can afford. Every meal begins and ends with bread. If you're lucky, you get to eat it with butter. Or, more likely, butter that's just colored lard and optimism. Sometimes you daydream about real flour, real dough, real flavor. Then you take another bite, try not to chip a tooth, and thank the universe for small mercies, like still being able to chew. So next time you're scrolling through artisanal sourdough on Instagram, remember, in Victorian times, the only thing guaranteed in your bread was disappointment. And, if you're unlucky, a little extra calcium, sleep tight, a glass of milk should be simple. Not in Victorian London. Here, your pint might be cut with river water, chalk, or whatever the milkman had left over from yesterday's deliveries. And don't even ask about the cows. They're probably as confused as you are. The day begins with hope. You wander through a maze of alleys, soot already sticking to your clothes, clutching a jug as if it contains the elixir of life. Maybe you've saved up enough to buy real, honest-to-goodness milk. The kind with cream that floats on top, thick enough to pretend you're middle class for half a minute. You line up with other children, some in boots, most barefoot, and wait for the milkman, who arrives with the speed and subtlety of a street magician, rolling out his cart with a cheery, morning, fresh milk, and a grin that says, "Buyer beware." There's no refrigeration in Victorian London, just the hope that last night wasn't unusually warm, and the rats stayed mostly outside the churn. Milk is ladled out from a giant tin can, possibly repurposed from the Crimean War. If you're lucky, it smells faintly of cow. If you're less lucky, it smells like the Thames at low tide and looks like something that would fail a chemistry test. But it's white, mostly. It's liquid, theoretically. And it's yours. Until you remember what you read in the penny press about the milk scandals. Let's talk about what's really in the bottle. Milk is supposed to be food's version of comfort. Creamy, gentle, trustworthy. In Victorian London, it's a canvas for deception. The average pint contains more water than your local pond, and not just any water, but whatever came out of the nearest pump, upstream or down. Chalk is a favorite additive because nothing says nutrition like drinking school supplies. Chalk whitens the milk, thickens it up, and adds a satisfying, gritty mouthfeel that's probably just the sound of your dentist weeping in the distance. Plaster of Paris makes the occasional appearance, as does starch, flour, and for the truly bold, a little flour to cloud the mix and keep you guessing. Sometimes, the vendor skips the middleman and waters the milk down until it's more memory than meal. If you see a suspicious layer floating on top, that's probably milk of yesterday, carefully skimmed off the bottom of yesterday's batch and poured back in with today's to stretch the profits. Is it fresh? Only if you define fresh as still moving. For the adventurous consumer, there's the thrill of blue milk, so-called because it's been diluted to a shade that, if you saw it in a paint swatch, you'd call Victorian haze. Kids gulp it down anyway, because it's that or water straight from the river, which comes with its own ecosystem and a 50-50 chance of dysentery. The truly unlucky might discover a layer of floating curds or a mysterious sourness. That's a sign you're basically drinking yogurt before yogurt was trendy. The real victims in this story? Victorian infants. Babies fed on diluted or contaminated milk suffer from what the newspapers call summer diarrhea, which is less a diagnosis and more a warning. Mortality rates skyrocket. Desperate mothers try to boil or strain the milk. But there's only so much you can do with a saucepan and blind faith. Chemists rail against the corruption, but the city is just too big, the profits too tempting, and the milkman too good at running away when the inspector appears. Modern comparison time. Today, you can walk into a store and buy milk that's been pasteurized, inspected, and shipped in a cold truck. You can check the sell-by date. You can taste it without first checking for gravel. The Victorian dream is a little different. You sniff, you sip, you pray. If you get through breakfast without stomach cramps, you chalk it up, literally, to luck. By mid-morning, the milkman is gone, the cart rattling off down the street in search of the next batch of optimistic customers. You've got your daily dose of calcium, plus a little river silt, a dash of 19th century uncertainty, and a lifetime's worth of skepticism about white liquids. Will you try again tomorrow? Of course you will. It's Victorian London, and sometimes the gamble is half the fun. You spot a street cart loaded with candy bright enough to double as a flare. The colour? Courtesy of lead, copper, and sometimes arsenic. The taste? Childhood, with a hint of the periodic table. It's early afternoon in Victorian London, and you're wandering down a crowded street, dodging stray dogs, mud puddles, and the occasional horse-drawn carriage that's just daring you to step in front of it. Suddenly, you see it, the sweet shop cart. It sparkles in the dirty light, a riot of reds, blues, and greens. Victorian children swarm it like moths to a gas lamp, each clutching a grimy penny. Eyes wide with a longing that only sugar can inspire, or at least what they think is sugar. You squeeze into the crowd and are immediately hit with the smell of syrup and something vaguely metallic. The vendor is all smiles and sticky fingers, his cart stacked high with peppermint drops, barley sugar sticks, acid drops, and glorious, jewel-toned hard candies. If you squint, it looks almost magical until you remember you're in the middle of the world's largest chemistry experiment. The Victorians loved colour in their sweets, and they didn't care how they got it. Take that impossibly green toffee apple. It owes its colour not to Granny Smith, but to copper arsenite, a pigment that's also really handy if you want to kill rats. The eye-popping red of the raspberry bonbon, probably thanks to lead oxide or mercuric sulfide, which has the fun side effect of making you see double before it sends you to the doctor. Blue sweets often get their kick from indigo, Prussian blue, or even copper sulfate, the sort of thing you'd expect to find under your sink, not in your mouth. Every lollipop is a lucky dip. Will you get a sugar rush, or just actual rushes, as in a medical emergency? And it's not just the colouring. Victorian sweet makers were creative with flavour too. Out of real fruit? No problem. Just mix in a little essence, a chemical cocktail that could be anything from coal tar to bitter almond extract. Cyanide, anyone? Did your toffee turn out a bit too soft? A pinch of plaster of Paris will firm it up. Hard candies that won't harden? Add a touch of chalk or powdered glass for that authentic Victorian crunch. But here's the twist. Nobody really knows. There's no regulation, no ingredient lists, not even a casual may contain traces of poison. The only rule is to sell as much as possible before the authorities catch on, and to never eat your own stock. Children don't care. Candy is candy. And if you can turn your tongue purple for 3 days, that's basically winning. You buy a stick of striped rock, break off a piece, and pop it in your mouth. It's sweet, a little gritty, and there's a faint taste of something you can't quite identify. Burnt sugar mixed with what you hope isn't rat poison. The vendor assures you it's perfectly safe, which is always what you want to hear from someone whose teeth are the color of old coins. Around you, kids laugh, compare tongues, and try to swap sweets with names like gobstoppers and acid drops, the latter of which are just as mouth-puckering as advertised, and maybe a bit more caustic than intended. Some unlucky souls do fall ill. Reports surface in the penny papers about children collapsing after eating emerald candies or scarlet comfits. Doctors, confused and frustrated, write long, angry letters about the dangers of colored confections. But the sweets keep selling. After all, what's life without a little risk? Besides, who wants a beige bonbon? Modern comparison. Today, you might worry about too much sugar or an artificial flavoring, but it's unlikely you'll eat a handful of lead for dessert. In Victorian London, sweets were a gamble, a glittering, mouth-watering game of Russian roulette. You finish your treat, unsure whether you should savor the taste or see a chemist, but either way, you walk away grinning. After all, it's not really childhood if you're not living a little dangerously. Feeling fancy? Pie and mash shops are the Victorian answer to fast food, with eels straight from the Thames. The good news? They're cheap. The bad news? So is the hygiene. Bon appetit. It's nearing lunchtime, and, miraculously, you still have a coin left. Your stomach growls, a sound halfway between desperation and hope. The smell of stewed onions and pastry crust wafts through the air, cutting through the fog and the constant aroma of horse manure. You follow the scent until you find a crowded little pie and mash shop. The window steamed over, a sure sign that something hot and questionably edible is being served inside. Step up to the counter, and you're faced with a menu that doesn't require much decision-making. You want pie? It's eel pie. You want mash? That's what comes with the pie. Fancy something on top? There's liquor, which is not a drink, but a bright green parsley sauce ladled generously over everything, as if someone believed enough sauce could drown out all the other flavors. Eels are everywhere in Victorian London. The Thames, for all its filth, is teeming with them, wriggling, slippery, and, most importantly, cheap. Fishermen haul them out by the basketful and deliver them to pie shops across the city. For the poor, eels are a rare source of protein that isn't bread, questionable sausage, or wishful thinking. The Victorians embrace the eel. They stew it, jelly it, bake it, and, if feeling adventurous, just eat it straight from the pot, bones and all. You order your meal and watch as the shopkeeper scoops a steaming pie from a tin, smashes a scoop of mash beside it, and douses everything with liquor until it glistens like a freshly washed pavement stone. The pie crust is golden but suspiciously tough. You know from experience that Victorian pastry is less flaky and more fortified. You crack it open to reveal, yes, eel, chopped into chunks, suspended in a savory greyish gravy. The eels stare back with the unblinking gaze of a creature that's seen things. You take a breath and dig in. The first bite is a surprise. The eel is tender and a little oily, the gravy peppery, and the mash bland but blessedly filling. The parsley liquor as well. It's green and it's there. It brings everything together in a way that suggests the Victorians believed parsley could fix almost anything. The flavors are earthy, briny, and surprisingly nostalgic if you ignore the fact that just hours earlier, your meal was probably slithering through sewage. Let's not sugarcoat it. Hygiene isn't the star of the show. Pie shops are loud, crowded, and always a bit damp. The cutlery is communal, wiped clean on someone's apron between uses. The tables are sticky, The floor is slick, and the air is thick with the sound of people slurping, talking, and occasionally arguing over the best way to eat an eel bone. If you drop your fork, don't panic. Everyone just keeps eating. Yet, despite it all, eel pie is beloved. It's comfort food for the working poor, a meal that promises warmth and a full stomach. Children line up with battered coins. Laborers wolf it down before returning to work. Some even claim eel is good for your health, a belief reinforced by the fact that if you survive eating it regularly, you're probably immune to almost everything else. Today, eel pie and mash are an endangered delicacy, more nostalgia than necessity. Modern food safety standards mean you're unlikely to find Thames eels on your plate, and liquor sauce has lost its heroic battle against ketchup. But in the Victorian era, pie and mash is more than just food. It's an edible badge of resilience, a proof that even when life is grey, there's something green and mysterious to pour on top. Every child loves a sweet treat. In Victorian Britain, toffee could kill you quicker than your dentist's bill, made with treacle, maybe a little butter, and possibly some mysterious minerals. Every bite is a spin of the chemical roulette wheel. You're a Victorian kid again, pockets empty except for the dust and lint that's been there since last Michaelmas, when you suddenly spot a toffee stall glimmering in the weak London sunlight. There's a crowd of children with smudged faces and bare feet, all craning for a view of the magical cauldron. It bubbles ominously, releasing the kind of steam that fogs up your already filthy glasses. The smell is thick and sugary, with undertones of coal smoke and desperation, a scent that lures in kids from 3 streets over. Your mouth waters in anticipation and in mild fear. The toffee man is an artist, or perhaps a rogue chemist. He works the bubbling pot with a wooden paddle that's seen better centuries, occasionally flicking bits of sticky sugar onto a battered tray to test for readiness. With a theatrical flourish, he pours the molten toffee into neat rows on a slab, then whacks it with a mallet, shattering it into bite-sized, jagged shards. Children's hands shoot out faster than a Victorian rat escaping the cat. You trade your precious halfpenny for a fist-sized lump and pop it into your mouth. The texture is simultaneously brittle and chewy, and there's always a chance you crack a tooth. There's also a chance you'll discover something far more unsettling. Victorian toffee is cheap because the ingredients are, let's say, flexible. In the best-case scenario, it's brown treacle and a smidge of actual butter or margarine. But for many vendors, that's too expensive. Enter the age of adulteration. To bulk up the toffee and give it a glossy finish, some creative souls add a generous portion of powdered chalk or even plaster of Paris. It gives that satisfying crunch and a trip to the chemist if you're unlucky. The rich, almost metallic taste? That's a hint of iron, courtesy of old pans that were never quite cleaned after the last batch. If your piece glitters suspiciously in the sunlight, it might be sand, swept up from the market stall and mixed in for texture. After all, what's a sweet treat without a surprise? Colour is another game entirely. Want your toffee to look more appealing? Just add a dash of red lead for colour, or a few drops of copper sulfate for a more exotic greenish hue. If the toffee tastes slightly bitter or burns the back of your throat, don't worry, that's just the chemical fun beginning. Children call it devil's delight, and the bravest claim it's a test of adulthood to eat a whole stick without wincing. Sometimes, the danger is more subtle. The toffee is wrapped in wax paper, but only sometimes. More often, it's handed to you bare, having absorbed a full day's worth of market grime and whatever interesting bacteria was left on the toffee man's hands. You suck, chew, and hope that today isn't the day you become a cautionary tale in the morning paper. Yet, despite the risks, toffee is wildly popular. Children return again and again, drawn by the sugar, the crunch, and the sense of triumph that comes from surviving another day of Victorian snacking. Dentists, or what passed for them in this era, must have had business booming. Mothers warn their children, but they sneak out for toffee anyway, drawn to the thrill like moths to a possibly toxic flame. Compare it to today. when every wrapper lists ingredients and warning labels in bold print. In Victorian London, there's just you, your toffee, and the wild hope that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or at least slightly sweeter. So you finish your treat, wipe your sticky hands on your trousers, and grin. You've survived another bite of history's most questionable candy. Sleep easy. Victorian ketchup is less Heinz, more tomato-adjacent slurry, bulked out with rotten apples, red dye, and whatever the grocer swept off the floor. It's a condiment that's legally classified as an adventure sport. Let's set the table. It's dinner time in a cramped London kitchen, and you're about to add some flavour to your otherwise bleak meal, a greyish wedge of pie maybe, or a lump of mashed turnip. You reach for the bottle of ketchup, the pride of every thrifty Victorian household. The label claims rich, savoury sauce, tomato, fruit, and spices. What it doesn't mention is that the rich refers to the population of microbes living inside. Ketchup in Victorian Britain is a far cry from today's thick, sweet, shelf-stable red stuff. The original concept was imported from Asia, fermented fish sauce, dark, salty, and not a tomato in sight. When the British got hold of it, things got out of hand. Enterprising grocers saw a golden opportunity. People wanted ketchup, and they didn't care what was in it, as long as it was red and poured easily. Tomatoes were expensive, rare, and not always available, so why not throw in whatever fruit was left at the bottom of the barrel? Apples past their prime, questionable plums, and buckets of cucumbers all found their way into the bubbling cauldron. Rotten apples? Toss them in. Fermented pumpkin? Even better. To add body, some recipes included breadcrumbs, potato flour, or, for the truly adventurous, a handful of sawdust. Got a batch that's a little too chunky? No problem. Strain it through some old cheesecloth, and you've got Victorian smooth. Is the colour off? Just stir in a bit of red lead, which conveniently doubles as both dye and slow-acting poison. Flavour, of course, is a gamble. Spices were expensive, so ketchup makers got creative. Instead of imported pepper or costly cloves, they favoured whatever was on hand: mustard powder, coal ash, or the faint hope that last week's batch of turnips would cover the taste. Preservatives weren't a thing yet, so bottles sat fermenting on the shop shelf, or worse, the windowsill, growing a lovely layer of mould that gave each bottle a vintage tang. You open your bottle, and there's a hiss, a pop, and a distinct waft of something that isn't tomatoes. You pour the sauce over your meal, watching as a watery reddish liquid with unsettling chunks splatters onto your plate. The taste? Sharp, acidic, strangely fruity, and with the aftertaste of deep regret. But in a world where food is bland and spices are for the rich, ketchup is as close as you'll get to excitement. Sometimes there's a little extra drama. Victorian newspapers loved a good food scandal. Reports appear of children falling ill after eating bright red sauce, or adults fainting from an unexpectedly strong bouquet rising from the dinner table. Chemists sample the sauces and, with a mixture of horror and scientific curiosity, discover that some bottles contain traces of opium, copper, and, just for a hint of authenticity, a splash of actual tomato. Health reformers campaign for change, warning the public about ketchup poisoning. The government responds with the usual enthusiasm. Some worried pamphlets and a gentle reminder to buy from reputable sauce dealers. The working poor, with few options and a taste for adventure, shrug and keep slathering their gruel with the sauce, because bland food is just too much to bear. Modern comparison time. Today's ketchup comes with tamper-proof lids, expiration dates, and quality control. In Victorian London, your only quality assurance was your sense of smell and your willingness to risk it all for a little flavour. So you finish your meal, wipe the mysterious red streaks from your chin, and wonder if tomorrow's dinner will taste less like a dare. But you have to admit, for one fleeting moment, your bland dinner became a culinary thrill ride, and if you survive till morning, Well, congratulations. You're now part of ketchup history. It's a sweltering summer in London, and you want ice cream. Instead, you get a penny's worth of frozen milk water, served with a side of salmonella and a not-so-fresh wooden spoon. Did I mention the ice was shipped in from who knows where? Let's paint the scene. The sun is blazing, for once. The cobblestones are radiating heat, and the air is filled with a mix of excitement and evaporating horse droppings. You've saved your penny all week, fantasizing about the luxury of something cold and sweet sliding down your throat. Suddenly, a bell rings through the alleyways, a sure sign that the ice cream man is making his rounds, trundling a wooden cart loaded with hope, sugar, and questionable science. Children materialize out of nowhere, forming a haphazard queue around the cart. The ice cream man himself is part magician, part opportunist. His white apron is only white in theory, and his hands, though busy, have never met the concept of sanitized. He winks and gestures to the shining row of tin molds in the cart, each filled with the promise of something delicious and cooling. The Victorian penny lick is the dessert of the people. For your hard-earned coin, you receive a tiny scoop of frozen something, technically ice cream, but only if you define cream as diluted, sweetened milk, with the occasional texture surprise. There's no refrigeration in Victorian London, just heaps of sawdust and a prayer. The ice, imported from Norway, or sometimes cut from the local canal, is chopped and packed into the cart each morning. You'd like to think it's pure, but even optimism has its limits. You clutch your penny lick, a small, thick glass dish, not meant to be kept, but to be licked clean and handed back for the next customer. It's communal dining at its finest. You stare into the cloudy depths of your scoop. If you're lucky, it's vaguely vanilla. If you're less lucky, it's just frozen milk water, already melting at the edges. There's always a chance of an extra ingredient, a mysterious lump, a speck of grit, or something that might once have been fruit, but is now just a rumor. Your wooden spoon is soft and splintery, the sort of utensil that inspires both trust and immediate regret. You dig in, bracing yourself for the brain freeze and the possibility of a future gastrointestinal adventure. The first bite is cold and glorious, sweet, icy relief in a world built on bread and boiling turnips. The second bite is a reminder that not all frozen things are created equal. Sometimes there's a faint aftertaste of fish, an echo of the Norwegian ice's previous life. Sometimes the vanilla is just a memory, replaced by a flavor that can only be described as miscellaneous. Hygiene? Let's just say that Victorian ice cream is a microbe's paradise. Penny glasses are rinsed in a single, murky bucket of water between uses. No soap, no boiling, just a quick dip and a swipe with a cloth of ambiguous color. The result? Everyone gets a little taste of community, and occasionally a bonus bout of typhoid or cholera. Health reformers eventually catch on, blaming the penny lick for spikes in disease. They're not wrong, but for a poor child in the summer, the pleasure outweighs the risk, at least until the stomach cramps kick in. Still, the penny ice cream cart is a symbol of Victorian joy. On a good day, when the ice is fresh and the milk hasn't yet curdled, it's a rare treat, cold, sweet, fleeting. For a moment, you forget the heat, the hunger, and the general Victorian malaise. The other children cheer, lick their glasses clean, and jostle for another round. You join them, savoring every slippery, risky spoonful. Modern ice cream comes in hermetically sealed tubs, with ingredients listed and expiration dates stamped in ink. But in Victorian London, dessert is a leap of faith, a cold, wobbly promise that, for a single penny, you too can taste happiness, and possibly a little adventure. You hand back your glass, wipe your mouth, and wander off into the Sunday. Another penny well spent. Another Victorian miracle survived. You pop into a market for a crunchy pickle and find one glowing an unnatural shade of green. Thank copper sulfate for that extra tang. Fun fact, It's banned now for a reason. It's market day in Victorian London and you're on the hunt for something, anything that isn't grey, soggy or alive. The market is a riot of shouting vendors, creaking carts, and the mingled scents of overripe fruit, roasting chestnuts, and the unmistakable perfume of fresh horse. But your eye is drawn to a barrel gleaming in the sun, filled to the brim with pickles so bright they look radioactive. You can spot them from across the street, a colour not found in nature, but apparently very popular in the late 1800s. Victorians loved novelty, especially in food. If you could dye it, gel it, mould it, or set it on fire, someone would eat it. And in the case of the green pickle, more colour meant more appeal. Forget the earthy, murky hues of natural brine. The goal is a shade of green that could make a parrot jealous and your grandmother faint. The secret ingredient? Copper sulfate, a vibrant blue-green chemical more at home in chemistry class than in your lunchbox. Pickling itself is an ancient art. The humble cucumber, left to marinate in a bath of vinegar, salt, and spices, transforms into something crisp, sour, and refreshing. In theory, this is a safe, even healthy snack. In Victorian practice, it's a roll of the dice. Vendors, eager to make their wares stand out, add copper sulfate to the brine for that luminous sheen. It doesn't matter that it's technically toxic. In fact, the brighter the better. Shoppers are drawn in like moths to a green, briny flame. You approach the barrel, inhaling a sharp, tangy aroma laced with a faint metallic edge. The vendor assures you these are the finest pickles in London, freshly imported and extra snappy. You hand over your farthing, fish out a pickle, and marvel at the colour. It glows, it glistens, it practically hums with danger. The first bite is crisp, tangy, and, underneath it all, just a little bit bitter. Is that the taste of innovation, or the chemical revolution happening in your mouth? You decide not to ask. Children love the novelty. There are rumors that eating these pickles will make you run faster, jump higher, or at least outshine your less fluorescent peers. Some even use them for dares. Who can eat the most green pickles without making a face? The only real loser is your liver, valiantly filtering out whatever didn't belong in the brine. Mothers turn a blind eye. If it keeps the kids quiet and doesn't cost more than bread, it's a win. Behind the scenes, doctors and early food reformers begin to raise the alarm. Copper sulfate, while undeniably eye-catching, is also undeniably poisonous. Side effects range from stomach aches and vomiting to full-on organ failure. Some people blame the pickles for everything from headaches to sudden Victorian melodrama. The penny press starts running lurid stories. Young boy glows after consuming 12 green pickles, and mystery illness strikes after market snack. Still, the pickles keep selling. Modern comparison time. Today, if your pickle glows in the dark, you call customer service. In Victorian London, you called your friends over for a taste test. Food laws were still in their infancy, and most enforcement came down to which chemist had the loudest megaphone. Eventually, copper sulfate was banned as a food additive, but not before an entire generation had stories, and possibly a few symptoms to share. You finish your pickle and wonder what else in the market is hiding a colourful secret. The world is brighter, bolder, and a lot riskier when you shop with the Victorians. You wipe your hands, lick the green tint off your lips, and march on, ready for the next adventure in edible innovation. So if you're ever offered a pickle that glows like envy itself, remember the Victorians. No risk was too bright, no snack too experimental. Bon appetit. Hungry for protein? Victorian sausages are mostly breadcrumbs, ground-up bones, and animal bits you hope were recently alive. You chew, you wonder, you move on with your life. If you're lucky. It's late afternoon in London and your stomach is growling. You pass a row of street vendors, each hawking their specialty with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people with nothing left to lose. Your nose leads you to a greasy stand with a simple offer. Hot sausages, 2 for a penny, The sign is bold, the price unbeatable, and the aroma. Well, it's complex. A blend of fat, onions, pepper, and a whiff of something you can't quite place. Something ancient. Sausages are the great equalizer of Victorian cuisine. Nobles eat them, labourers eat them, and children risk their pocket change for a bite. On the surface, they're a perfect food, portable, filling, and guaranteed to be less alarming than whatever you just saw floating in the Thames. You step up, hand over your coin, and receive a pair of plump, sizzling links, their skins just on the edge of bursting. But let's talk about what's really inside. Victorian sausage making is an art form. If your definition of art is whatever can be scraped, minced, or swept up at the end of the day. Meat, yes, but not the prime cuts. Instead, you're getting a little bit of everything. Beef trimmings, pork scraps, offal, cartilage, and more breadcrumbs than a bakery floor at closing time. If you're lucky, the vendor has thrown in some fat to keep things moist. If you're less lucky, you're biting into a blend that's part animal, part mineral, bones ground so fine they add a distinct crunch that's both unexpected and vaguely distressing. Seasoning? Absolutely. A little salt, plenty of black pepper to mask whatever flavors might otherwise escape, and a suspicious amount of herbs that do more for your breath than your confidence. Some sausage makers get creative with fillers. Potato flour, rice, sawdust for texture, and, in truly inspired moments, a splash of stale beer to help everything bind together. The result is less pork delight and more culinary question mark. You bite in, the casing snapping with a satisfying pop. The inside is soft, warm, and peppery. It's a mouthful of comfort until you hit a surprise. Is that a bit of gristle? Maybe. Something unidentifiable and chewy, almost certainly. You chew thoughtfully, telling yourself it's all part of the experience. For the Victorian poor, this is often the only meat they'll taste for days, and the only reliable source of calories that isn't just bread in a different outfit. Of course, sometimes the sausage experience is even more thrilling. Unscrupulous vendors are notorious for refreshing leftover sausages. Those that weren't sold yesterday are simply reheated, resold, and occasionally rebaptized in new spices. Freshness is a flexible concept. If the sausage glistens more than usual or has a particularly powerful scent, that's the patina of history you're tasting. The health risks are real. Food reformers warn about sausages made with rotting meat, cheap fillers, and meat from animals of uncertain origin. There are stories in the penny papers of sausages causing gastric incidents and violent agitations. Doctors shake their heads, but the queues remain long. The city's working poor need food, not lectures. Modern sausage comes in neat plastic, with ingredients you can pronounce and a shelf life measured in weeks. The Victorian variety is more immediate, a now or never kind of snack. You eat it on the street, hands greasy, eyes watering from pepper, and the faint hope that you'll live to tell the tale. By the time you finish, your stomach is full, your lips tingling from spice, and your curiosity slightly traumatized. You move on, because in Victorian London, mystery is the main ingredient, and survival is the secret sauce. Tea is the fuel of the British Empire. Victorian tea is sometimes just actual tree leaves, dried dust, or last week's sweepings mixed with lead for colour. Milk it if you must. It's late in the day, the streets are cooling, and the sky over London is more grey than blue. You wander home from work, hands still tingling from scrubbing, sweeping, or whatever back-breaking task the day demanded. There's only one thing on your mind: a hot, comforting cup of tea. Tea is the heart and soul of Victorian life. It's the difference between barely surviving and almost content. For the poor, it's often the only luxury, strong, hot, and, at least in theory, reassuringly familiar. You step inside a tiny, smoky kitchen where the kettle boils over a flickering coal fire. The tea caddy is unlocked with all the ceremony of opening a bank vault. Leaves are precious. Every pinch counts. Your hands shake a bit as you spoon some into a battered pot and pour in boiling water, watching the familiar brown clouds swirl and settle. The smell is earthy, comforting, if a little bit sharp. Someone pours in a splash of milk, perhaps watered down, perhaps only vaguely resembling milk, but it softens the brew and turns it a gentle tan. But let's talk about what's really in your cup. Tea, like everything else in Victorian Britain, is a game of confidence. Imported by the shipload from India or China, by the time it reaches your table, it's traveled thousands of miles, been handled by hundreds of hands, and probably improved by more than a few middlemen. Adulteration is rampant. Good tea leaves are expensive, so merchants stretch their profits by mixing in anything with a similar look and feel. Dried sloe leaves, willow, and even random hedge clippings find their way into the blend. Sometimes it's harmless, sometimes less so. Used tea leaves, already brewed and then dried in the sun, are swept off the factory floor and repackaged for the unsuspecting pour. In one infamous trick, brick dust is ground fine and used to deepen the color, while old leaves are stained with black lead or Prussian blue to mimic the high-quality stuff. You lift your cup and take a cautious sip. The taste is sharp, slightly metallic, and bitter enough to remind you you're alive. If it goes down smoothly, you're either very lucky or your taste buds have surrendered. It doesn't matter, really. For most, tea is less about flavor and more about ritual. A hot drink, a few moments of peace, a chance to pretend that life is something other than endless toil. Milk is supposed to be the great equalizer. You pour in a splash, hoping it will smooth out the rough edges and hide the taste of anything that shouldn't be there. Of course, your milk is just as likely to be diluted, sour, or suspiciously thin, but in the dim light of evening, you tell yourself it's all part of the charm. If you're especially lucky, there's sugar on the table, a rare treat for the working class, but enough to take the edge off any industrial aftertaste. It's not just the working poor facing the gamble. Even middle-class Victorians are vulnerable to counterfeit tea and questionable milk. Food reformers campaign for stricter regulation, but progress is slow. Chemists publish warnings in the newspapers about poisonous blends and chemical dangers lurking in every teapot. Still, the national thirst prevails. Today, we complain about weak tea bags or too much tannin. Victorians face tea that might have started as leaves, but ended up as a minor public health hazard. Yet the ritual continues. Boiling water, a battered cup, hands wrapped around the only warmth in the room. You sip, savor, and settle into a brief, much-needed moment of calm. For a little while, everything feels almost right. Just don't look too closely at what's floating in your cup. A staple for poor children, the penny bun is more filling than fulfilling. Bulked up with plaster, pipe clay, and stale flour, it's the original empty calories, except it's also possibly toxic. It's breakfast time in Victorian London, and you've already spent most of your energy just getting out of bed. You shuffle onto the street. Hair must, shoes optional, clutching the single precious coin that stands between you and hunger. The baker's stall is already busy. Children and adults alike jostle for position, their eyes fixed on the neat rows of round brown buns, each the size of a clenched fist, each promising the kind of comfort that only carbohydrates can deliver. You hand over your penny and are rewarded with a bun that is heavier than you expected, yet oddly springy. The crust is stiff, the center pale and dense, and there's a flowery aroma that mingles with hints of coal smoke from the ovens. You take a bite, expecting a burst of yeasty, buttery goodness, but what you get is something closer to compressed dust with a suspiciously chalky aftertaste. Let's talk about ingredients. In the absence of modern food laws, Victorian bakers are a creative bunch. Real flour is expensive, especially after years of poor harvests and rising demand. To make every bag stretch further, Bakers bulk out their dough with anything pale and powdery. Chalk, ground-up pipe clay, and sometimes even plaster of Paris. These substances add weight, improve the bun's mouthfeel if you like eating soft rocks, and keep the price down. The result is a bun that will fill your stomach but may also settle there like a brick. If you're lucky, your bun contains at least a little wheat, possibly some stale breadcrumbs swept up at the end of yesterday's baking. In the best-case scenario, you'll find a rare raisin or a whisper of currant. If not, you get flavor from whatever yeast or sourdough starter is still hanging on from last week's batch. Sugar is rare and reserved for the rich, so your penny bun is about as sweet as the Thames and twice as gritty. Texture is everything, and here the penny bun really shines, by which we mean it is indestructible. Bite into it, and you're greeted by a resistance that can only be described as unyielding. Some children turn their penny buns into toys, rolling them along the pavement or using them as makeshift cricket balls before finally gnawing on them during lunch. Others dunk them in their weak tea, hoping to soften them enough to avoid a trip to the local tooth puller. Still, more than a few Victorian teeth are sacrificed to the mighty bun every day, and yet the penny bun persists. It's cheap, portable, and, if you squint and don't think too hard about the ingredients, almost comforting. It's the fuel that powers chimney sweeps, mudlarks, and newsboys through another day of labor. Parents love them because they're filling. Children love them because, well, there isn't much else on offer. And bakers love them because, let's be honest, selling plaster for profit is good business until someone invents regulations. By midday, you've managed to work your way through half the bun, the rest stored in your pocket for later, assuming it doesn't turn to powder the minute you look at it the wrong way. News spreads quickly if a baker gets too bold with his additives. Occasionally, there's a public scandal, an outraged headline, or a chemist's exposé in the penny papers. But until the authorities step in, the penny bun reigns supreme, a symbol of thrift and culinary adventure. Today, bread comes in soft, fluffy loaves, with expiration dates and allergy warnings. But in Victorian times, the only warning you got was the sound of your teeth meeting something that really shouldn't be there. So you chew, swallow, and march on, full, if not exactly nourished. After all, you survived another penny bun. You're craving jam for your bread, but actual fruit is a luxury. Victorian jams are often sweetened with glucose, colored with dyes, and occasionally seasoned with ground-up beetles. Enjoy. It's a chilly Victorian morning, and after gnawing your way through the day's penny bun, you dream of something to make it slide down easier. A smear of glistening fruit jam. If only you could afford it. The market stall is piled high with jars promising raspberry preserve, strawberry delight, and the evocative Queen's Best plum. The jars glisten in the grey light, promising summer in a spoonful. You scrape together your coins and buy the smallest pot, clutching it like a tiny jar of hope. You pop the lid, expecting a rush of berry perfume. Instead, you're greeted with a whiff of sugar, something slightly chemical, and an undertone best described as mystery. You spread a generous dollop on your stale bread and take a bite. It's sweet, sticky, and almost fruity, but you can't quite place the flavor. Is it raspberry? Is it beetroot? Is it? Let's not ask. Here's the secret. Victorian jam is rarely what it claims to be. Fruit is expensive, even more so in the city, and especially when half the crop is lost to blight or shipped straight to the mansions of the wealthy. So jam makers become masters of illusion. Instead of bursting berries and orchard-fresh plums, your jam is mostly sugar. Pounds and pounds of it, boiled down to a syrupy mass. Actual fruit, if present, is diced thin and spread thin. If you find a whole berry, congratulations. You've won Victorian breakfast bingo. To bulk out their wares and fool the unwary, Some producers add mashed turnips, carrots, or even bits of apple. The result is sweet, thick, and vaguely wholesome, but not exactly what it says on the label. If the color looks too good to be true, think ruby reds, glowing purples, or a shade of orange not found in nature. Probably is. Synthetic dyes, often made from coal tar, are all the rage. They give jam a vivid appeal and a hint of toxicity that lingers long after breakfast. Flavor is just as flexible. A drop or two of almond extract, some bitter apple essence, or, for the extra thrifty, a dash of ground-up cochineal beetle, the Victorian answer to red food coloring, creates that authentic fruitiness. If you get an aftertaste of insect, congratulations, you're eating both with history and a small part of the animal kingdom. Food reformers and chemists, ever on the lookout for new scandals, run tests and issue warnings. Newspapers publish exposes, jam, or just a jar of lies, and the beetroot scandal of Stepney Green. But for most poor Londoners, the alternative is nothing on their bread. So they keep buying, keep spreading, and keep ignoring the flavor's suspicious resemblance to last night's soup. Modern jam comes with fruit percentages, organic options, and fruit pieces big enough to recognize. In Victorian times, reading the label is just the beginning of the adventure. There are stories of children turning faintly pink from breakfast, or developing a mysterious rash after a particularly colorful Queen's Best. Still, the jam business booms because, even at its worst, it's better than dry bread and cold tea. As you finish your breakfast, licking sticky fingers and ignoring the faintly chemical aftertaste, you consider yourself lucky. In a world of chalky buns and suspect sausages, a jar of jam, whatever its ingredients, feels almost luxurious. It's not about what's in it, it's about what it lets you imagine. Berry orchards, sun-warmed fields, and a world where breakfast is sweet for all the right reasons. So you head out the door, energy high and expectations low, ready to face another day, one spoonful of sweet, jammy fiction at a time. Butter in the Victorian era is whatever you can churn, scrape, or buy. If it tastes oddly metallic, that's probably because it's stretched with mashed potatoes, lard, or yellow dye that didn't come from nature. It's the grey, damp hour before dawn, and your bread, already resembling a brick, needs something to make it slide down easier. You squint, hopefully, at the shop window, where a slab of butter sits behind glass, glistening gold in the flickering candlelight. A sign proclaims finest country butter, which, in the world of Victorian food, is your first clue that you're about to be lied to. You hand over your coin for a scraping, dreaming of creamy, golden luxury melting into every crevice of your crust. You sniff, hopefully. There's a faint hint of dairy, overpowered by the sour tang of yesterday's batch and the oddly sweet, waxy smell of that potato. Welcome to the Victorian butter experience. More mystery, less cow. Let's churn through the facts. Butter is expensive, and most Victorian city dwellers can't afford the real thing. So, as with everything else, ingenuity and deception step in. Butter on most working-class tables is likely a blend, if you're lucky, of old butter mixed with animal fat, mashed potato, water, or even chalk. Each ingredient stretches the supply and pads the profit, if not the flavor. Color is everything. The Victorian ideal is yellow butter, the brighter the better. But real cows, especially winter cows, just don't produce much color. Enter the world of butter dye. Marigold petals, carrot juice, and, for the truly reckless, yellow ochre pigment scraped straight from the painter's palette. If you notice a shade that glows like a sunrise, consider that a warning. Some vendors get creative with mashed turnip or turmeric, whatever will fool the eye, if not the mouth. The result? A substance that, if chilled, is nearly unspreadable, and if warmed, rapidly becomes a greasy puddle with all the structural integrity of regret. Its flavor can best be described as indistinct. with undertones of tallow, chalk, and sometimes a note of fish, depending on the day and the vendor's supply chain. But in a city where real butter is rarer than a landlord with empathy, people make do. Some households buy margarine, an innovation of the era, marketed as French butter. It's a marvel of modern science, beef fat whipped with milk and colored up to the legal or illegal limit. Housewives debate fiercely at the market. Is margarine a triumph of progress, or just a new way to be disappointed at breakfast? Health reformers and food chemists try to intervene. Newspapers print horror stories of decomposed butter or cases where entire families are felled by the yellow plague of rancid fat and toxic dye. The government considers, then mostly ignores, proposals for stricter controls because, honestly, who has the time? As with all things Victorian, risk is part of the ritual. You spread your butter on stale bread, knowing it will never melt like in the picture books. You eat quickly, chewing through the slightly gritty, suspiciously sweet smear, all the while hoping you won't taste anything you can't pronounce. For the working poor, it's better than nothing, and sometimes better than knowing. Modern butter is a miracle. Pasteurized, pure, and labeled by actual cows. But in the world of penny-pinched Victorians, breakfast spreads are as much a gamble as the daily news. If you get a piece that tastes of grass and sunshine, count your blessings. If not, at least you have the satisfaction of surviving another breakfast lottery. So you finish your bread, scrape the last of the butter off the knife, and get on with your day. Lips slick, stomach uncertain, and a new appreciation for whatever flavor comes next. You spot a tin of soup or preserved meat on a shop shelf, a marvel of modern science. And also possibly the source of your next bout of food poisoning, thanks to lead solder and questionable contents. It's a blustery afternoon in Victorian London. The streets are slick with rain and something less describable, and your boots, if you have any, are leaking from the toes. You duck into the local grocer's shop, where wonders of the modern age gleam from every shelf. Glass jars, paper-wrapped cakes, and, most excitingly, rows of shiny, neatly labeled tins. Beef stew, mock turtle soup, peaches in syrup. You marvel at the idea. Food, preserved for weeks, even months, just waiting for the twist of a key or a deft whack with a coal shovel. Tinned food is the latest thing. Canning is all the rage with the Victorians, an invention so brilliant even the Queen herself is said to indulge. No more endless hours salting, drying, or pickling. No more spoiled meat crawling with maggots by Thursday. Just pop open a tin, heat, and serve. For soldiers, explorers, and the increasingly busy Londoner, this is progress you can eat. You reach for a tin of soup, weighing it in your hand. It's heavy, reassuringly solid, and you dream of the piping hot meal to come. The label promises choice cuts of beef with savory vegetables. You ignore the fine print, mostly because you can't read it by the weak daylight. At home, you attack the lid with a knife, a rock, or, for the wealthy, an actual tin opener. The seal cracks, steam rises, and you're greeted by a thick, greyish mass that smells faintly of meat, vegetables, and something metallic. Here's the thing about Victorian canned food. What's on the label is just the beginning of the adventure. Canning is new, but food safety is not exactly a high priority. The inside of your tin is sealed with lead solder, a handy way to keep air out, and a subtle invitation for heavy metals to get in. Eat enough, and you might experience headaches, stomach pains, or the classic Victorian colic, otherwise known as lead poisoning. But wait, there's more. The actual contents of the tin depend on the honesty and competence of whoever did the canning. Sometimes it really is beef and vegetables, tender and hearty. More often, it's whatever couldn't be sold fresh, old scraps, tough gristle, the mystery bits swept off the butchering floor, all stewed together and drowned in brine. Fruit, too, gets the tinned treatment, peaches, pears, plums, and the occasional unidentifiable lump that started life as one thing and ended as another. Opening a tin is a moment of suspense. Is it soup, or is it a jelly-like horror? Is it fragrant with herbs, or is it sour, metallic, and vaguely threatening? Sometimes you're lucky. Your meal is filling and almost tasty. Other times, you regret every decision that led you to this moment, especially if the contents start fizzing, hissing, or moving. Newspapers publish stories of entire families felled by tainted tin. Soldiers at the front lines write home about canned meat that tastes suspiciously like shoe leather, only less digestible. Reformers push for tighter controls and better inspection, but food inspectors are few, bribes are common, and tin canners are as slippery as their product on a cold day. Today, you expect expiry dates, ingredient lists, and a helpful best by sticker. Victorians, in contrast, open tins with a sense of adventure, and occasionally, last rites. You eat what you're given, hope for the best, and pray the next meal is less exciting. So you finish your soup, grateful for the warmth if not the flavor, and add your empty tin to the growing pile behind the house. You survived another meal in the age of progress. A triumph for science, commerce, and the mysterious power of your digestive tract. Fruit is expensive, so grocers get creative. Want that perfect shiny apple? It's been dipped in arsenic to keep the bugs, and possibly customers, away. You're walking down a bustling Victorian street, eyes stinging from coal smoke and nostrils flaring at the scent of horse and cabbage. But there's hope on the horizon. A market stall bursting with fruit. The apples are stacked in impossible pyramids, each one polished to a mirror shine, catching every stray ray of London's feeble sunlight. After days of grey bread and meat with more adjectives than actual animal, a fresh apple feels like a luxury fit for a queen. You fumble in your pocket and hand over a precious coin. The grocer, all smiles and sideburns, plucks an apple from the pile. It's a thing of beauty, round, glossy, red as a fever dream. You bite in, expecting crisp sweetness and the taste of a long-lost orchard. Instead, you're greeted by a flavor that's part apple, part something else. Something a little sharp, a little bitter, a little what exactly did I just put in my mouth? Here's where the Victorian genius for dangerous shortcuts comes in. Keeping fruit fresh in a city where half the population can't tell a plum from a potato isn't easy. Apples bruise, spot, and rot in record time, especially when stored in dark, damp cellars and handled by hands that may or may not have been washed since last Michaelmas. Enter the miracle of science. Arsenic and lead-based fruit washes. It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. To make fruit shine and stay bug-free, vendors dip their stock in solutions containing arsenic trioxide or lead chromate. The result? Apples that are impervious to pests, mold, and unfortunately, sometimes to digestion. The apples look flawless, waxy, and unnaturally bright, even if the inside is starting to go. The Victorian shopper, impressed by appearances, rarely questions why the grocer's apples never seem to have so much as a wormhole. You, however, might start to notice. After the first mouthful, your tongue tingles in a way that feels neither natural nor desirable. Is that a faint metallic aftertaste? Is it the skin or the polisher's secret ingredient? You remember a story in the penny press. Local boy falls ill after eating glowing pear. The papers are full of rumors about poisoned fruit, everything from arsenic apples to mercury peaches. Some cases are real, others exaggerated, but all serve as a warning. In the Victorian age, beauty is only skin deep, and sometimes that skin will ruin your week. Still, fruit is fruit, and most people decide a little risk is worth a mouthful of something sweet. Parents wipe apples on their sleeves and hand them to hungry children, who crunch away happily, blissfully unaware of the chemistry involved. Even food reformers, so loud about bread and milk, can't seem to keep up with every polished apple or shining grape. Occasionally, the government tries to step in, but the laws are slow, and enforcement is slower. Grocers find new ways to make fruit irresistible. Some use beeswax, some go straight for the toxic dyes, and a few honest souls just scrub their apples and hope for the best. The rest? Well, let's just say you'd better get used to that tangy aftertaste. Modern shoppers would panic if their fruit glowed under the kitchen light. But in Victorian times, the brighter and smoother the apple, the more desirable it became. No one wants to buy a bruised, honest apple when they can have a perfect, poisoned one for the same price. You finish your apple, tongue tingling, lips a little numb, and pocket empty. Another culinary adventure survived, another Victorian gamble paid off. As you walk away, you wonder if maybe next time you'll just buy a turnip. Water is for the reckless. Beer, even for children, is safer. Until you realize the brewery might use cheap, unregulated ingredients and a dash of opium for extra relaxation. It's early morning in Victorian London, and you're rubbing the sleep from your eyes, already bracing for the day ahead. Your stomach growls, and you reach for a crust of yesterday's bread. But what's truly calling your name is the jug sitting on the kitchen table. It's not milk, we all know how that goes. And it's definitely not water. No one who values their intestines drinks straight from the pump. Instead, you pour yourself a mug of small beer, the go-to beverage for every member of the household, from scruffy toddlers to toothless granddads. Victorian beer is a far cry from the hoppy IPAs of modern taprooms. It's more like very weak ale, a low alcohol, lightly fermented, not quite water, that's just strong enough to kill most of the germs lurking in London's water supply. Children drink it with breakfast, workers chug it before heading out, and even the most proper mothers wouldn't blink twice at handing a frothy mug to their youngest. After all, it's practically medicinal, or so the advertisements say. The logic is painfully simple: water is dangerous. In a city where sewage runs through the streets and rats hold family reunions under the floorboards, trusting the tap is a rookie mistake. Beer, on the other hand, is boiled during brewing, and the alcohol, however mild, offers a measure of safety. Plus, it's filling. For the poor, that extra bit of yeast and grain might be the closest thing to breakfast. But beer is a flexible term in the Victorian world. Some brewers are scrupulously honest, crafting batches with just barley, hops, yeast, and water. Others, however, see opportunity in every shortcut. Weak beer gets a boost from questionable additives, a little burnt sugar for color, a dash of strychnine, yes, really, for bite, and sometimes a pinch of opium or laudanum to give it a calming finish. If your morning beer feels oddly soothing, you might be more relaxed than you bargained for. Quality control is almost non-existent. The cheapest beers are bulked out with everything from roasted beans to tobacco juice, with the end result depending more on luck than on recipe. If you find yourself extra perky or suddenly very sleepy, you've just experienced the artisan touch of Victorian chemistry. Health reformers warn of beer adulteration in the penny papers. But for most, the choice is simple: weak beer or slow death by dysentery. Breakfast in a working-class home means sipping beer alongside your stale bread and cheese. You might pour a mug for the children, who quickly acquire a taste for the yeasty tang and mild fizz. Older folks, those who've survived enough rounds of Victorian life, tend to have stronger opinions and, sometimes, stronger brews hidden away for special occasions. For the poor, it's not about getting drunk, it's about not getting sick. Modern times give us filtered water, juice, and coffee. Victorians had beer, tepid, mild, occasionally suspicious, but rarely lethal. You raise your mug and toast to your continued survival, knowing you've just made the safest hydration choice available. And if you feel a little drowsy by mid-morning, just blame the house blend. In the end, beer for breakfast isn't a luxury, it's just common sense. Cheers to another Victorian day, and may your next pint be only mildly sedative. Chocolate bars hit the market, but the first ones are bitter, gritty, and possibly laced with things that aren't chocolate. If you can pronounce it, it probably isn't in there. It's the late Victorian era, and word on the street is that chocolate isn't just for the upper crust anymore. Fancy advertisements shout about pure cocoa delights and healthful chocolate bars for the people. You, being a person of taste, and at least 3 pennies in your pocket, decide to try this new luxury. At the market stall, chocolate bars sit stacked like edible gold bricks, wrapped in paper promising finest quality and no adulteration. You know better by now. Victorian chocolate is a far cry from the silky smooth confection you're used to today. The earliest bars are more like slightly sweetened brown gravel. Cacao beans are expensive and notoriously tricky to process. So manufacturers, ever resourceful, pad out their product with starches, potato flour, and a bit of whatever powder is left over from the day before. If the chocolate tastes a little earthy, that's not terroir, that's likely sawdust. You break off a piece, feeling the unmistakable grainy texture. The taste is bitter, the sugar barely there, and the aftertaste lingers somewhere between medicinal and uncertain. Some bars come with flavor enhancers, which could mean vanilla or could mean tonka bean, banned today for being toxic in large quantities. Others include a dash of brick dust for that extra crunch, or a smidge of ground nutshells to help bulk up the batch. Color is another battlefield. Victorian chocolate isn't always that comforting brown you're picturing. Manufacturers add red iron oxide to give it a rich, deep color, or a bit of Prussian blue if they're feeling bold, anything to mask the dull gray of diluted cacao. The result? Chocolate that looks dramatic in candlelight but may leave your tongue tinged with regret and questionable minerals. Then there's the sweetness. Sugar is precious, and most affordable chocolate bars only flirt with it. Glucose syrups, treacle and molasses stand in for the real thing. And every bite is a reminder that luxury in Victorian London is always relative. You might even get a surprise swirl of saccharin, one of the first artificial sweeteners, and as always, not entirely tested for safety. If you're lucky, your bar might come studded with fruit, which is often candied peel, dried currants, or, when supplies run low, dyed turnip bits. Nut-filled bars are filled with nuts, yes, but also plenty of shell, and sometimes the odd pebble from factory floors. The warning labels? There are none. Food reformers and dentists are not amused. Chocolate, they argue, is less a treat and more a chemistry set in a wrapper. The penny papers publish exposes with headlines like, "Is your chocolate pure?" and lethal sweets for London's children. Chemists call for more regulation, but the hungry public, worn out from chalky bread and toxic sweets, just shrugs and buys another bar. Today, chocolate is a controlled miracle, made with care and tested for purity. For the Victorians, it's a gamble, delicious or dangerous, creamy or crunchy, a decadent bite or just another edible experiment. So you finish your chocolate, feeling slightly gritty but more or less content. After all, in Victorian London, a chocolate bar, no matter how mysterious, is still sweeter than another grey bowl of gruel. Here's to adventure and to whatever you just ate. Vendors shout about shellfish and steaming peas. Your stomach shouts back. Street food is either a delight or a digestive daredevil act. Most Victorians know the difference. After the fact, it's dusk in Victorian London, and the streets are alive with the cries of hungry crowds and hopeful hawkers. You wander along the bustling market lane, the air thick with smoke, coal dust, and the tang of something fried. The city's poor rely on street food for a quick, hot bite, a brief comfort between long shifts and longer nights. The choices are many, but each comes with a hidden catch. Welcome to Victorian street food roulette, the most affordable gamble in town. First up, the shellfish sellers. Their stalls are piled high with oysters, cockles, and whelks. Cheap, plentiful, and only slightly risky. Oysters, once the food of the masses, are sold by the dozen, cracked open right before your eyes. The vendors swear by their freshness, but fresh is a moving target in a city where the Thames serves as both pantry and sewer. You buy a handful, douse them in vinegar, and gulp them down, savoring the briny bite and hoping for the best. Sometimes they're delicious. Sometimes, well, let's just say you'll remember them for days. If you prefer something warmer, follow your nose to the hot pea stands. Vendors wheel their carts through the evening fog, shouting, "Hot peas, piping hot." You hand over a penny and receive a ladleful of mushy peas, steaming in the chill air. The peas are soft, buttery, and comfortingly bland, served in a scrap of paper or, if you're lucky, a cracked mug. You eat quickly, ignoring the occasional pebble or odd bit of grit, just more evidence of the bustling London street. Other favorites include fried fish, potato cakes, and, if you're feeling adventurous, sheep's trotters, singed and salted for extra flavor. Each snack is a bargain. Each bite a roll of the dice. Hygiene? Don't ask. The same hands that take your coin also handle the food, and washing up means a quick dip in the nearest bucket. Water blackened by a day's business. For the bold, there's always winkles, tiny snails picked from their shells with a pin, swallowed whole with a swig of beer or weak tea. Some say they're a delicacy. Others say they're just a dare gone wrong. No matter what you choose, the risk is half the fun. Of course, the city's penny papers are full of warnings. Headlines shriek about epidemic strikes after street oysters, and children fall ill from questionable peas. Health reformers demand cleaner stalls and better standards. But the reality for most Victorians is that a hot meal on the street is better than no meal at all. The crowds keep coming, drawn by the heat, the price, and the thrill of something new. Modern street food comes with gloves, permits, and inspections. In Victorian London, it comes with character and a strong stomach. Every snack is a memory in the making, maybe a treat, maybe a regret, but always a story to tell. You finish your meal and wipe your hands on your coat, feeling full, satisfied, and just a little bit brave. As you disappear into the evening crowds, you accept the truth of Victorian street food. If you don't remember it fondly, you'll remember it urgently. Either way, tomorrow is another day, and another round of culinary roulette awaits. A refreshing lemonade stand on a hot day, what could go wrong? The answer: everything. If your lemonade is flavored with sulfuric acid, a favorite for that extra zing. The sun is high over Victorian London, a rare day when the city isn't blanketed in drizzle or smog. You're parched. The air is thick and sticky, the kind that makes you long for something cold and tart. Just as your tongue starts to feel like sandpaper, you hear the cheerful cry from the corner. Lemonade! Fresh, genuine lemonade, 1 penny a glass. It sounds like a miracle in a city where water is suspect and tea is more bitter than life itself. You join the line at the street vendor's cart, your hopes high and your standards well, Victorian. Glasses clink, coins clatter, and soon you're handed a cloudy, pale yellow drink. The vendor grins, wiping his hands on a mystery-stained apron, and assures you it's the real article. You take a hopeful sip, expecting a burst of citrus. Instead, you get a mouthful of sugar, a touch of tartness, and a finish that tingles, a sensation somewhere between refreshing and chemical warfare. Here's the secret. Lemons are expensive. For most vendors, the only thing genuine about the lemonade is the price. The main ingredients are water, a heap of sugar, or whatever passes for sugar this week, and citric or tartaric acid for that sharp edge. A few enterprising souls, however, have discovered that a tiny splash of sulfuric acid, the same stuff found in batteries, gives lemonade an unbeatable mouth-puckering zing. It's cheap, it's easy to find, and it's great for cleaning coins and removing warts. Why not put it in your drink? The result? a lemonade that could double as a chemistry experiment. Some batches taste like lemons, others like regret. Every now and then, a glass packs such a punch, you half expect it to etch your initials into your teeth. If the vendor is particularly generous, your tongue goes numb, your lips tingle, and you spend the afternoon wondering if your insides are cleaner than ever before. Of course, the penny press catches on. Headlines warn battery acid in the lemonade and public menaced by sulfuric swindle. Food reformers and doctors lecture on the dangers of chemical concoctions, but the average Londoner shrugs. In a world where beer is safer than water and milk is a gamble, a slightly dangerous lemonade seems almost quaint. Sometimes, vendors use other tricks. A few drops of yellow dye for color, or a sprig of mint to distract from the aftertaste. Some try to make their concoctions healthful by adding quinine or digestive powders, with mixed and sometimes spectacular results. If you ask what's in the glass, the answer is always lemon and love. Read, don't ask. Modern lemonade is filtered, pasteurized, and rigorously inspected. But in Victorian times, refreshment is a risk, and every glass an adventure. You finish your drink, lips tingling, and wonder if your thirst has truly been quenched, or if you've just swapped one problem for another. Still, on a hot day, a penny lemonade is pure Victorian optimism in a glass. Sweet, sharp, and just a little bit reckless. You wipe your mouth, thank the vendor, and walk away with a smile, ready for whatever the city throws at you next. Even the prized Sunday roast gets the Victorian touch. Meat padded out with breadcrumbs, gravy thickened with brick dust, and vegetables boiled until they admit defeat. It's Sunday in Victorian London, a day of rest and, if you're lucky, a real meal. All week, you've subsisted on chalky buns and mystery stews, but today, tantalizing smells drift from the bakeries and taverns. Even the air seems to buzz with anticipation. For most, the Sunday roast is the culinary highlight of the week, a chance to pretend, if only for an hour, that life is something more than a survival sport. You gather around the battered family table. The children squirm with excitement. Someone produces a battered tin plate. There, glistening in the flickering light, is the main event. A slab of roast beef, or at least something that started out as beef, ringed by potatoes, carrots, and the faintest memory of a green vegetable. Steam rises, and your mouth waters. You carve a slice, inhaling the scent of roasting fat and whatever managed to survive the fire. But let's talk reality. Meat in Victorian London is expensive and rare, especially for the working class. To make it stretch, the butcher pads the joint with generous handfuls of breadcrumbs, day-old crusts, and, for those in the know, a scoop of suet or drippings. Sometimes, the roast isn't even beef at all, but mutton, pork, or a creative combination of the week's leftovers, pressed together and roasted until unrecognizable. The vegetables fare no better. Potatoes are reliable, if floury. Carrots and turnips have been boiled to the brink of oblivion, soft enough for the toothless, and bland enough for the indifferent. Peas, if present, are more grey than green, having sacrificed their dignity and colour to hours of relentless simmering. Cabbage may appear, boiled and bitter, filling the air with a perfume only the Victorians could love. Then there's the gravy, oh the gravy, a true miracle of thrift. Flour is scarce, so the clever cook adds whatever's on hand, potato starch, old bread, and sometimes, in a feat of Victorian daring, a pinch of brick dust to give it colour and body. The result is a sauce that clings to your meat and, with luck, doesn't crunch between your teeth. Pepper and salt are doled out with caution, each grain precious as gold. Most of the flavour comes from the pan drippings, or occasionally the memory of drippings from weeks past. Despite all this, Sunday roast is a treat. It's hot, it's filling, and it's eaten in good company. You savour each mouthful, trying not to dwell on the faintly metallic aftertaste or the way the bread sops up the gravy like a sponge in the Thames. The children fight over the crispiest potato, and someone always manages to sneak an extra crust. By the end of the meal, the table is cleared, the plates are licked clean, and there's a collective sigh of satisfaction. Modern Sunday dinners come with perfect roast beef, crisp vegetables, and lashings of rich gravy. In Victorian London, you make do, stretch what you have, and celebrate the fact that you're eating something that vaguely resembles real food. So you lean back, full for the first time all week, grateful for the meager comfort of the roast, even if the nutrition is mostly wishful thinking. Licorice is cheap, popular, and sometimes black because of soot or cheap dyes. If your tongue is still attached, you've beaten the odds. It's a foggy afternoon in Victorian London, the kind that makes you wish you owned a real coat. The streets are thick with the sound of vendors hawking everything from whelks to walnut shells. But today, your eye is drawn to a humble stall with a sign that reads, "Licorice sticks, a farthing each." Children crowd around, grinning, their teeth already dark with sugar and secrets. Licorice, the working child's delight, is the candy that promises a lot for a little. Sweet, chewy, and, crucially, affordable. It's the snack of the young, the restless, and the dental professional. The vendor hands you a glossy black stick. It's cold, firm, and sticky enough to glue your fingers together. You bite in, bracing yourself for a jolt of sweetness that tastes somewhere between root, molasses, and, if you're unlucky, charcoal. Real licorice root is imported, boiled, and concentrated into a sticky black goo. That's the theory, at least. But as with all things Victorian, corners are cut in spectacular fashion. To stretch the precious root and keep prices low, confectioners pad out their wares with flour, sugar, and the occasional sweepings from the workbench. Black is the color of luxury, so vendors are happy to help things along. Soot from the chimney, lamp black, or Berlin black, a dye so strong it could stain your soul. If you finish your licorice and your tongue isn't jet black, you probably got short-changed. Sometimes the coloring is more dangerous. Lead acetate makes an occasional appearance, creating a shine that's just as deadly as it is dramatic. There are stories in the penny papers, child struck ill by licorice, and mysterious black sickness among sweet eaters. Health reformers issue warnings. But most children are more worried about running out of candy than running into trouble. Chewing licorice is a full-body experience. The first bite is a workout for your jaw. The second is a struggle between stickiness and resolve. By the third, you're rewarded with a rush of intense, bittersweet flavor. Or, if you're especially unlucky, a mouthful of grit. Street licorice sometimes contains small pebbles or bits of ash, an accidental bonus for the adventurous eater. Some kids even trade tongues after seeing who's turned blackest, a grim badge of honor in the soot-choked city. Adults complain about the mess, licorice stains on hands, faces, and clothing that linger for days. Some schools ban it entirely, citing concerns about discipline, filth, and the faint but persistent risk of sudden, unexplained illness. Still, demand never wanes. For every warning, there are a dozen more children handing over their hard-earned farthings, ready to take another sweet risk. Modern licorice is a tame affair, regulated, inspected, and flavored more with anise than danger. But in Victorian London, every stick is a gamble, cheap enough for the poor, risky enough for the bold, and dramatic enough for every child who wants a black tongue and a good story. You finish your licorice, lips smudged, tongue stained, teeth tingling with sugar and soot. You may not know exactly what you just ate, but you survived, which, in Victorian London, is its own reward. And tomorrow? You'll probably buy another. If you're truly down and out, you get gruel, oats, water, and possibly the memory of flavor. Anything else is extra. And no, you don't get extra. It's dawn in a Victorian workhouse, and you're already hungry. The cots are hard, the air is damp, and your stomach rumbles in the key of desperation. Breakfast is coming, and everyone knows what's on the menu: gruel. If you're unfamiliar, Gruel is what happens when you cross porridge with pessimism and remove everything that could remotely be considered fun. You queue up with the others, clutching your battered tin bowl. The kitchen is steamy and loud, filled with the clatter of ladles and the murmur of complaints. The cook, a master of the unappreciated art of stretching oats to infinity, stands at the massive pot, stirring with the determination of someone who's long since given up on tasting anything. Next, she barks, and you step forward. A ladleful of thin, greyish liquid sloshes into your bowl. It wobbles, it steams, and it inspires neither confidence nor appetite. Gruel is the great leveler. Rich or poor, if you're in a workhouse or orphanage, you eat it. Made with oats, or, in lean times, just barley or even breadcrumbs, it's mostly water, with a hint of starch and, on lucky days, a suggestion of salt. There are rumors of sugar, milk, or even the odd raisin, but you know better. Those are legends whispered to new arrivals. For the rest, it's just gruel, plain and unyielding. You find a spot at the long communal table. The room is filled with the sounds of scraping spoons and polite silence. Everyone focused on coaxing the most flavor from the least promising meal. You blow on your spoon and take a cautious sip. It's warm, which is good. It tastes faintly of oats, which is almost exciting. Mostly, though, it tastes like not dying, which in Victorian poverty is as good as a feast. Sometimes there are surprises. If the cook's in a good mood, maybe you'll get a pinch of salt. If she's distracted, perhaps a lump of undissolved oats or a foreign object for extra crunch. On Sundays, a richer benefactor might donate a splash of milk or, rarely, a drizzle of treacle. Those are the days children talk about for months. Proof that miracles are possible, even if only by accident. There are, of course, those who complain. It's too watery, it's too thick, it tastes of nothing. But complaints are a waste of breath, and, besides, everyone's too hungry to argue. The rules are clear. Eat what's given, ask for nothing, and try not to look at the bottom of your bowl when you're finished. Some days, you use your bread, if you get any, to mop up the last drops, extending the meal by a precious few seconds. Modern overnight oats might come with chia seeds and organic honey. Victorian gruel comes with humility, patience, and a faint hope that tomorrow's pot will be less watery. Food for the poor isn't about pleasure, it's about survival, pure and simple. You scrape your bowl, licking the spoon and wondering how long until the next meal. Gruel may not be glamorous, but it fills a need, and sometimes that's enough. And as you shuffle off to another day, you remind yourself, at least you ate. In Victorian London, that's more than many could hope for. Eventually, people start to notice the side effects of eating paint for breakfast. Scandals erupt, chemists panic, and Parliament grudgingly steps in, just a few million deaths later. It's late Victorian London, and the cracks are starting to show in the great culinary con. For years, you and your neighbours have nibbled on buns laced with plaster, sipped milk that tastes of the river, and savoured sweets bright enough to guide ships through the fog. Maybe you've noticed your teeth chipping on your penny bun, or perhaps you're wondering why the licorice turns your tongue black for a week. But what's a little poisoning between friends? Then, suddenly, the scandals begin. Newspapers catch wind of a horrid discovery at a pie shop. Sausages stuffed with sawdust, green pickles steeped in copper sulfate, butter the colour of a jaundiced daffodil. The headlines scream, "Shocking adulteration exposed." The public is appalled and a little impressed at the creativity. Outraged customers demand answers, but shopkeepers just shrug. Everyone does it, madam. How else would we stay in business? The real heroes of the era are not politicians but chemists. Enter Frederick Ackham and Arthur Hill Hassall, two men who spend their days poking through the city's food supply, uncovering horrors at every turn. Ackham, a German scientist with a flair for the dramatic, publishes A Treatise on Adulterations of Food. A book as thick with evidence as the city is with fog. He finds alum in bread, lead in candies, copper in pickles, and chalk in almost everything else. His warning? There is death in the pot. Londoners, suddenly queasy, look twice at everything they eat. Soon after, Arthur Hill Hassel takes up the mantle, examining market food with his trusty microscope. His reports for the Lancet read like Victorian horror stories. He exposes red wine coloured with lead, coffee mixed with burnt sugar and sand, and jam bulked out with mashed turnips. Public outrage builds. Pamphlets circulate. Editorials shriek. Cartoonists have a field day, drawing bakers pouring buckets of chemicals into their dough. But Parliament, never in a hurry, dithers. Businessmen claim these practices are traditional, and that nobody has actually died, well, nobody important. Besides, if you ban the brick dust, what's left for gravy? Still, with pressure mounting, a few brave lawmakers finally act. In 1860, the first Food Adulteration Act stumbles onto the books. A document as leaky as the Thames, but at least a start. Enforcement is a challenge. Local officials are reluctant, bribes are rampant, and some chemists find themselves threatened or pelted with buns by angry bakers. Shopkeepers get clever, swapping out one adulterant for another or simply making their labels more creative. Still, the tide has turned. Inspectors, empowered slightly by law, begin spot-checking milk, bread, and candy. The public, no longer in blissful ignorance, learns to trust nothing and taste everything with suspicion. Over time, stricter laws follow. The 1875 Sale of Food and Drugs Act tightens regulations and gives teeth, not made of chalk, to food inspectors. Suddenly things improve, slowly, unevenly, but noticeably. Plaster in bread becomes rare. Milk is just milk, and your sweets, though still likely to rot your teeth, probably won't rot your insides. Today, a food scandal makes headlines and recalls are swift. In Victorian London, the miracle isn't that reform came at all, it's that anyone survived to see it. So, the next time you check an expiration date, raise a glass of unadulterated milk to the chemists, whistleblowers, and indignant Victorians who finally demanded something safer for supper. Let's put it all together. Imagine you're a Victorian child, living on street food, penny buns, and the odd sweet. How long could you last? Spoiler: not long. And yet, millions did, one chalky bun at a time. Your day begins before dawn. Woken by the sound of carts rumbling over cobblestones and your own rumbling stomach. There's no warm kitchen or breakfast buffet. Just a chilly room, a threadbare blanket, and maybe, if luck is with you, a crust of yesterday's bread. You gnaw at it, savouring the hints of plaster and pipe clay. It's dry, tough, but filling. If you're truly fortunate, your mother has scraped together a bit of butter, an unholy blend of animal fat and yellow dye, to spread on top. It melts, sort of, if you hold it near the fire long enough. On your way out the door, you pass a vendor hawking hot sausages. With a precious coin, you score two. The outside is greasy, the inside a blend of breadcrumbs, offal, and hope. They're surprisingly spicy, if only to distract from the occasional bit of bone. For a drink, you gulp a mug of small beer, safer than the water, which is just begging to make you ill. The beer is weak, yeasty, and might even help you ignore the aftertaste of your last meal. By mid-morning, your stomach is growling again. You eye the street carts, maybe a penny bun, suspiciously heavy and suspiciously pale. You bite in, risking your teeth and welcoming the familiar chalky flavour. If it's market day, you might splurge on a glistening green pickle, bright with copper sulfate, or perhaps a handful of whelks or oysters, fresh from the Thames, and potentially teeming with surprises. Lunch? It's whatever you can find. Maybe a scoop of mushy peas doled out in a scrap of newspaper. Maybe a stick of licorice, your tongue stained black, your fingers sticky. your mouth tingling with the taste of soot and sugar. On a lucky day, you might get a chunk of eel pie, or even a wedge of toffee. A thrilling experience, provided you avoid the shards of plaster. Afternoon brings more hunger. You dream of fruit, but the shiny apples at the market have a strange tang, arsenic wash, for a flawless shine. Still, they're better than nothing. If you can scrape together a farthing, perhaps you treat yourself to a scoop of penny ice cream, eating quickly before it melts, hoping the communal glass doesn't give you more than just a cold tongue. Dinner, if you're home, means gruel or soup. Thin, grey, and only just food. It's hot and filling, if nothing else. Sometimes there's meat in it, more often there's not. Maybe you dunk bread in the broth, or sop up gravy so thick it could hold up a spoon. If you're really unlucky, you taste the telltale tang of brick dust, today's secret ingredient. Through it all, you're surrounded by thousands just like you, tough, hungry, and fiercely inventive. You share food, stories, and occasionally complaints about the latest stomachache. Survival isn't just about calories, it's about luck, resilience, and a willingness to eat almost anything labeled edible. Could you survive? Maybe, for a while. Victorian children did, growing up strong, or at least stubborn, on a diet that modern nutritionists would call a crime scene. And every day you last is another victory. Another miracle in a world where breakfast, lunch, and dinner are all a little bit dangerous. You walk past an apothecary window and spot a sign advertising nutritious breakfast gruel, fortified with healthful tonics. Sounds promising until you realize those tonics contain everything from laudanum, that's opium in a bottle, to strengthening syrups made of questionable plant matter. Your morning bowl is less a superfood and more a sedative. On the bright side, at least you're too drowsy to notice the flavor. Let's set the scene. It's a grey Victorian dawn. You're tired, sore, and dreaming of breakfast that does more than fill the void. At the corner of the street, a makeshift cafe advertises health gruel and fortifying elixirs. You duck inside, lured by the promise of energy, wellness, and maybe even a little sophistication. The shop smells like oats, herbs, and something medicinal, like a doctor's office mixed with a barn. Your bowl arrives steaming, the contents a beige mystery crowned with a generous drizzle of invigorating syrup. You dig in, hopeful for a boost, but the first taste is bland, gritty, and oddly floral. It's supposed to be oats, but it tastes suspiciously like sleep. You glance at the bottles behind the counter. Laudanum, tincture of valerian, syrup of poppies. For the price of a bowl, you get more than fiber. You get a full Victorian pharmacy. This is the world of Victorian health food, where good intentions collide with the era's favorite drugs. Nutrition science is still in its infancy, and most experts double as pharmacists, quacks, or enthusiastic amateurs. The logic goes, if a little bit of something is good, a lot must be even better. So, gruel is fortified not just with milk, when available, but with soothing syrups, nerve tonics, and a shot of whatever happens to be on special that morning. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, is the superstar, recommended for nerves, headaches, insomnia, and ironically indigestion. It finds its way into breakfast bowls, baby bottles, and anything else that will sit still long enough. Feeling anxious? Try a double dose. Kids cranky? A spoonful does the trick. In Victorian London, half the population is sleepwalking through life, well-fed, well-medicated, and blissfully unaware of the risks. Some health foods get even stranger. Beef tea, another breakfast favorite, is water with a hint of beef. Simmered down and bottled with promises of strength and vigor. Add a dash of herbal fortifier. Maybe some coca leaf extract for pep. And you've got breakfast, lunch, and a legal high, all in one mug. Newspapers run glowing testimonials from satisfied customers, while doctors debate the merits of oats versus opium. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Reformers warn about the dangers of habit-forming foods, but most people are just relieved to have something, anything, that takes the edge off reality. Mothers swear by the soothing power of medicinal gruel, and workers joke that if breakfast doesn't wake you up, it'll at least make the day pass quickly. Modern health foods promise antioxidants, protein, and fiber. Victorian health foods promise peace, quiet, and the best nap you'll ever have before 10 a.m. You finish your bowl, already feeling a little lighter, a little slower, and definitely less interested in whatever's coming next. As you step outside, the city seems a bit fuzzier around the edges. Maybe you're healthy. Maybe you're just comfortably numb. In Victorian London, sometimes the best superfood is the one that lets you forget what's in it. Your throat is sore, and you do what any self-respecting Victorian would: buy a penny's worth of vinegar lozenges from the chemist. These miracle sweets promise relief and good cheer, but what you actually get is a mouthful of acid, powdered alum, and the faint taste of old socks. If your throat still hurts, at least your taste buds are now numb. It's midwinter in Victorian London, and every street is echoing with coughs, sneezes, and the hacking of overworked lungs. You've spent all night shivering under your threadbare blanket, only to wake up with a throat that feels like you gargled coal dust. On your way to work, you pass the neighborhood chemist, a storefront promising cures for all ailments in the window. A hand-painted sign catches your eye. Vinegar lozenges, 1 penny, swift relief. Desperate, you hand over your coin. The chemist, a man with sideburns that belong in a Dickens novel, plucks a paper twist from a dusty jar and places it in your palm. You unwrap the lozenge. It's chalk, white, powdery, and smells sharply of vinegar with a hint of something medicinal, or possibly just ancient. You pop it in your mouth, bracing for a rush of soothing sweetness. What you get instead is a full-on chemical assault. The lozenge fizzes briefly on your tongue, burning with vinegar and something caustic, alum, if the penny press is to be believed. Alum is great for tanning hides and setting dyes, but less ideal for soothing human throats. The taste is equal parts acid, bitterness, and memories of the rag bin. You try not to grimace as your eyes water. Somewhere in the background is a suggestion of sweetness, but it's mostly overwhelmed by the sensation of having licked a window cleaner. You keep sucking, mostly because you paid for it. After a minute or two, your throat is less sore, mostly because it's gone numb. The package claims you'll soon be singing like a nightingale, but all you're doing is blinking away tears and wondering if the cure is worse than the complaint. Vinegar lozenges aren't the only dubious Victorian medicine. The city's chemists are bursting with remedies for every possible ailment. Cough drops laced with morphine, herbal syrups loaded with alcohol, and tonics spiked with cocaine for a little extra pep. Labels boast of scientific formulation and immediate results. The reality is a lottery. Some cures help, some hurt, and some leave you with a story you'll tell for years. If you're lucky, the lozenge will at least distract you from the endless London fog and your rapidly vanishing sense of taste. If not, well, you're still better off than the folks who try the tar pastilles down the street. Yes, actual tar, guaranteed to coat and comfort. Modern cough drops promise honey and menthol, soothing flavors and tested ingredients. The Victorian version promises nothing but surprise and a lingering regret. The chemist assures you the lozenges are perfectly safe and, with a wink, offers you a second for half price. You politely decline. You continue on your way, throat tingling, mouth puckered, and with the distinct impression that sometimes the cure is as interesting as the disease. In the great Victorian tradition, you carry on, ready for whatever new flavor of misfortune the day throws at you, just maybe with one fewer lozenge in your pocket. Every market stall is plastered with signs promising the latest patent food invention. Want a biscuit that never goes stale? Try one improved with borax. Fancy a soup that lasts for months? It's pickled, tinned, and tastes like an experiment gone wrong. In Victorian times, the word patent was just code for contains more science than food. It's late afternoon in a bustling Victorian marketplace. You weave between barrels, crates, and shouts of vendors hawking their wares. Try the new patent biscuit. Good for voyages, picnics, and your teeth. A nearby sign advertises patent potted meat, guaranteed never to spoil. The possibilities are endless, and the claims are extravagant. Food and science are having a love affair, and your stomach is along for the ride. You eye the biscuit cart, curious about these so-called marvels of innovation. The vendor hands you a hard, oblong biscuit. Its color somewhere between antique ivory and laundry day gray. You bite in, hoping for flavor, and are greeted by a snap so loud it startles a passing dog. The texture is brittle, the taste bland, and faintly chemical. Borax, the vendor says proudly, keeps it fresh for months. Borax, you realize, is great for laundry but slightly less charming in your digestive tract. Soup is another favorite of the patent craze. Cans and jars line the stalls, promising warmth and nutrition long after you've forgotten what real food tastes like. Patent preserved pea soup lasts a year, the label claims. You pop open a jar at home and pour out a lumpy, oddly green concoction that smells faintly of salt, vinegar, and lost hope. Ingredients are listed in tiny print: peas, water, salt, vinegar, and preservative. If you wonder what that means, the answer is usually something you'd clean a floor with. Meat, too, gets the patent treatment. Potted beef comes sealed in earthenware jars, packed tight with suet, salt, and the mysterious improvers. It spreads like cold butter and tastes mostly of salt, but it's guaranteed to keep for months if you don't mind the layer of yellow fat and the unsettling sheen. In fact, if you're traveling or worried about the next famine, patent foods seem like a miracle. But if you're after actual flavor, they're a letdown. Victorian patent means a lot of things. Sometimes a real scientific advance, but more often just a new way to disguise cheap ingredients or cut corners. Borax keeps the biscuit from molding. Sodium benzoate keeps your soup from turning to science fiction. Salicylic acid ensures your fruit preserves survive the apocalypse. The government issues occasional warnings, and reformers mutter about chemical cuisine, but the public is too dazzled by the modernity to care, at least until the stomach cramps begin. Still, there's something thrilling about the idea: the food of the future, made today. No need to worry about seasons, spoilage, or even taste. Just open, chew, and hope for the best. Modern supermarkets are filled with packaged, preserved, and improved foods. But few can match the bravado or the unpredictability of the Victorian patent era. You finish your biscuit, nursing a slightly numb tongue, and resolve to stick to apples. Then you remember what they're polished with and decide, once again, that in Victorian London, every meal is a leap of faith and every patent label just another mystery to solve. Cheap soup kitchens are the pride of the Victorian philanthropist, vats of grey liquid ladled out to the masses. The catch? The main ingredient is often bones, more bones, and whatever vegetables were swept up off the market floor at closing time. The result is less nourishing meal and more existential question. Is this actually soup, or just regret in a bowl? Picture this. It's a damp, bone-chilling evening in London. You're broke, hungry, and the city's notorious pea soup fog is rolling in. Only this time, it's not made of peas. The line outside the local soup kitchen snakes down the street. A hungry parade of orphans, old men, and anyone who can't stretch a penny bun any further. You shuffle forward, hands shoved in pockets, drawn by the promise of nutritious broth, free to all. Inside, the kitchen is steamy and chaotic. Philanthropists bustle about, wearing aprons and the self-satisfied smiles of people who believe in the power of boiled turnip. Great cauldrons bubble ominously in the background. The air smells vaguely of onion, wet wool, and hope on life support. The sign above the door proclaims, "Hot soup, God bless the generous." The soup? Well, that's another story. You hand over your chipped bowl, and a volunteer slops in a ladleful of something. The liquid is a milky, uncertain grey, dotted with floating fragments of cabbage, potato peel, and unidentifiable lumps. Occasionally, you'll spot a shred of actual meat, a thin slice of marrow clinging to a bone, or the ghost of a chicken that died in vain. Rumor has it the recipe begins with whatever didn't sell at the market, then boils it until even the cockroaches surrender. The main event is bone broth. Real bones, scavenged from butcher's bins, provide both the base and most of the nutrition. Assuming you're good at extracting calcium from marrow and patience from adversity. Carrots, turnips, and onions join the pot, depending on the generosity of donors and the luck of the draw. Some kitchens are famous for their meatless mutton stew, a broth with all the flavor of sheep, but none of the inconvenience of actual lamb. Seasoning is optional and usually accidental. A stray bay leaf might drift through your bowl, or maybe it's just someone's button. If you're extra fortunate, you'll catch a whiff of pepper, but mostly the soup's flavor is vague with notes of yesterday. A crust of bread, hard as fate, accompanies your meal. Useful for sopping up the last dregs, or for defending your bowl from the next person in line. Yet, despite all its shortcomings, soup kitchens are a lifeline. For the very poor, it's the one meal of the day that's hot and sometimes almost filling. The kitchen is noisy, crowded, and bustling with stories. Kids slurp, old men mutter, and everyone dreams of the day when the main ingredient isn't just boiling water and good intentions. Today, we associate soup with comfort and warmth, brimming with flavor and nutrition. In Victorian London, soup for all means soup for survival, a thin shield against the cold and hunger, and sometimes a lesson in humility. You finish your bowl, licking the last watery spoonful, and hand it back for the next soul in line. Outside, the fog swallows your footsteps. Tomorrow's dinner is another question mark, but tonight, you're grateful for soup, whatever it really was. Victorian children love black licorice candies, even though they taste like sadness and shattered dreams. But some clever vendors realize you can get the same color for half the price with a generous scoop of coal dust. It's cheap, it's gritty, and it'll turn your tongue black for days, assuming the rest of your insides don't revolt first. It's a chilly afternoon on a sooty London street, and a crowd of children has gathered around a rickety candy stall. The star attraction? Long sticks of jet-black candy, stacked in neat piles beside jars of boiled sweets and lemon drops. The sign reads, "Black sticks, a farthing apiece. Guaranteed color." The candy man, with coal-stained hands and a smile full of missing teeth, winks as he scoops another handful of his bestseller onto the counter. You hand over your precious farthing and claim your prize. It's heavy for its size, and sticky enough to pick up a fine dusting of whatever else is on the vendor's cart. You bite in, bracing yourself for that familiar rush of sweet bitterness. There's a hint of licorice, a mouthful of sugar, and something else, a kind of earthy crunch that lingers between your teeth. Is it aniseed? Is it burnt sugar? No, that would be too kind. What you're tasting is Victorian ingenuity. Coal dust, the unsung hero of 19th century cost-cutting. Genuine licorice root is expensive and, thanks to high demand, not always available. Some vendors can't afford the real thing, so they improvise. They mix sugar, a little cheap molasses, and just enough coal dust to make the color dramatic and the flavor distinctive. Sometimes they even toss in a pinch of lampblack or soot, anything to get that perfect, inky shade. The result? A treat that's as black as the London fog and about as easy on your system. Your friends gather round, proudly displaying tongues and teeth dyed midnight. The bravest compete to see whose candy can stain lips the longest. Victorian mothers, resigned to endless laundry, mutter about cheap sweets and cheaper morals. Teachers shake their heads when the afternoon lesson is interrupted by half a dozen children, spitting out little bits of coal and grinning like mischievous goblins. Occasionally, the penny press reports on outbreaks of sweet shop sickness, children taken ill after eating too much of the mysterious black confection. Chemists warn about the long-term effects of ingesting coal, but in a world where chalk in bread and copper in pickles are everyday risks, a little coal dust feels almost routine. Besides, the candy is cheap, and it's better than nothing. Not all black candies are created equal. The more reputable shops use proper licorice, though it's never quite sweet enough to hide the natural bitterness. Some add a hint of anise, others use nothing but sugar and coloring, but everyone agrees, the blacker the sweet, the better the story. If you can show up to dinner with a tongue as dark as the River Thames, you've had a good day. Modern confectionery laws would have a fit at the very thought. Today, black sweets are flavoured and coloured by science, but never by the coal scuttle. In Victorian London, if it was cheap and eye-catching, it was fair game for a candy maker. So you finish your stick, grin at your friends, and relish your moment as the coal-dusted champion of the street. After all, you survived another sweet risk in the world's tastiest industrial revolution. So tonight, as you curl up in your clean bed with your snacks that probably won't poison you, take a moment to be grateful. Grateful for ingredient labels, health inspectors, and the fact that your bread isn't padded out with ground-up bones and a sprinkle of arsenic for colour. We've wandered through Victorian markets where sweets glowed like radioactive traffic lights. Milk was whiter than snow for all the wrong reasons, and the only thing more uncertain than a penny bun was your next trip to the privy. The truth is, surviving a single day on the diet of a Victorian child was less about culinary adventure and more about sheer luck. Every meal was a roll of the dice. Would your lunch contain more protein or more heavy metals? Would your sweets come with a side of hallucinations or just a mild case of lead poisoning? If you made it through a week, you either had a stomach of steel or simply hadn't noticed what was lurking in your pie. Yet, somehow, millions did survive, cobbling together a childhood out of chalky bread, neon pickles, and the dubious comfort of eel pie. Their resilience is both astonishing and slightly terrifying. It's a reminder that even in the wildest, most unregulated corners of history, people managed to laugh, play, and tell stories, often while chewing on